the Warriors of Chaos, one of the most brutal and ferocious armies to ever terrorise the old world. Every section of his army is designed for utter destruction and relentless killing power, but if that power is not wielded efficiently, it will surely fail. So in this guide, we'll take a look at the Chaos roster and everything that they're capable of. This guide is not specifically meant for the campaign or online, and is more of an overview of how the Chaos army works and thrives against its opponents.
Come, my swords of chaos!
So what are the main characteristics and traits of the Chaos army? Well, it's no secret that their infantry is mightily strong. Some of the best in the game, capable of dealing with all other enemy infantry, not to mention some strong anti-large components. Couple that with a plethora of different monsters to help mutilate your enemy, and you've got a combo that no other faction has. But all this power comes at great cost, as the Chaos units are very expensive, so you can often find that your army is considerably smaller than your opponent's because you had to spend more on each individual unit. This lack of numbers can be very dangerous, as it leaves you open to envelopment, the complete surrounding of your army, because the enemy so heavily outnumbers you. So against those factions that can bring a lot of numbers, you have to be prepared on how you're going to defend your flanks. And somewhere in the middle, the Chaos of course lack decent ranged options. They do have some missile cavalry and an artillery, so they're not completely useless in that department. This could also be considered a major negative, but I think they have a lot of different ways that they can deal with missiles. And I think overall, envelopment is more of an issue than their lack of ranged units. And lastly, it's a bit of a strange one, but the Chaos seem to have a real problem with mass routing. This is when 2 or 3 units maybe start to rout, and then suddenly your entire army is running in the other direction. I'll talk about this more later on, but the Chaos seem to struggle with it more than other factions. So taking in these traits and understanding them is very important when playing as or against the Chaos. Now let's look at how this all ties in to their in-battle performance. So, the Warriors of Chaos then. I'm going to begin with an arguable point that the Chaos are a very balanced faction. Now you may not think this because they have less ranged units, but the point is they do have some. They do have a piece of artillery that is very powerful, that if they want to sit back on a hill and just blast people with a couple of those, they can do. Some of their infantry is also dwarf-like, so playing in a defensive fashion is a possibility for the Warriors of Chaos. At the other end of the spectrum, you typically class the Warriors of Chaos as a rush faction. If you want to, you can discard any kind of ranged unit and just charge them down with your powerful infantry and monsters. Or you could go for a balanced build and play a steady tactical game. They also have great cavalry to aid in the protection of your flanks. Their strong variety of units gives them many potential playstyles. But as I've mentioned, these stronger units are very expensive. So to avoid envelopment, army size has to be considered. So when facing factions that can bring a lot of numbers, you may be wise to try and match those numbers with some of your cheaper units. Of course, this is more of an online problem than a campaign one, as you can bring a full stack of Chosen if you want to, but ultimately the cost is going to affect the campaign too. Now, the beauty of some of the Chaos infantry is that they are almost dwarf-like in their ability to hold the line. Chaos Warriors, Chosen, Aspiring Champions, all have great melee defense, great leadership and great armor, so they are very difficult to get rid of without armor piercing. And that sturdy front line is nicely coupled with the fast monsters that you have available. Great for flanking around the edges and coming up behind the enemy to wreak absolute havoc. So it's kind of like you have the staying power of the dwarves on your front line with the fast flanking abilities of the vampires combined into one faction. Most factions either have one or the other, strong front line, fast monsters. No other faction has both like the Chaos does. And most of those monsters come with the fear and or terror abilities, making psychologically disruptive builds very possible with the Chaos. It's also worth noting that the Chaos have some fantastic anti-large units. Their halberds are probably the best anti-large infantries in the game. Also, all Dragon Ogres come with a bonus versus large, and those are of course very strong and fast, so they've got some options for dealing with monsters. Although one area the Chaos can struggle with is flying units. Unless you've bought a bunch of flying units yourself or a bunch of missiles, you may find yourself being harassed by flying units. And lastly, most of the magic lore books available to the Chaos are the more evil of sorts, so their magic is focused on being offensive and doing a lot of damage to the enemy. Direct damage, wind spells, vortex spells, weapon buff spells, very little in the way of defensive or regen spells to buff your troops with. This of course just serves to increase the Chaos's utter murdering abilities. So that is my take on the Warriors of Chaos. A very strong and flexible faction, provided you can make the most of all that money you've spent on each individual unit. Which brings me to stressing the point that good application of your units is very important for the Chaos. I mean, it is for any faction, but for the Chaos and their expensive units, you need to try and make the most of them. Where the greenskins will be able to bring 3 units of Orc Boys, you could bring 1 unit of Chosen who will be able to deal with all them no problem. But if the Chosen have been harassed and damaged by artillery or cav charges, then they may not be able to deal with those 3 Orc Boys. So protecting your investment and avoiding damage as best you can is very important for the smaller armies of the Chaos. One problem with this whole idea though is the speed disparity between the Chaos army. You've got very slow infantry but very fast monsters. If you put them in a locked group and have them all move together, they're all going to be moving at a maximum of 28 speed, which is a lot of time for your expensive big units like Dragon Ogres or Trolls to be smashed with artillery and missiles. So just be aware of that and be as coordinated as you can. Now to my note on mass routing. This is something I've noticed when playing as and against the Chaos, that when things are going seemingly okay and the Chaos look like they're winning the battle, all of a sudden a couple of units will start to waver, maybe 2 or 3 a rout, and then the next thing you know, the entire Chaos army is running for the hills. This is common to see of low leadership factions like the Greenskins or the Beastmen, but for the high leadership Chaos infantry, it's very strange. Yes, there is of course the Friends routing leadership penalty that applies when units start to rout around you, but for some reason it seems like the Chaos feel this more than other factions do, for a reason I can't quite put my finger on. Statistically, I can't see any reason why it happens, but it does seem to happen. The Chaos also seem to turn into quivering children when their Lord goes down as well, so keeping your Lord alive for the Chaos seems to be very important. On to this chaotic roster then, 'tis a powerful one indeed. We shall begin as always with our Lords. The first of the bunch is the Chaos Lord. Like most factions, they have a decent melee Lord as their cheapest option, and he's probably your choice Lord if you're looking to save some money. He's got decent armour, a decent shield, and pretty decent stats and abilities all across the board. You can make him slightly more powerful by putting him on mounts. You can put him on a Chaos Dragon or even a Manticore, so he can become pretty formidable, but of course this increases his cost. And then we have another melee character, the legendary Lord, Prince Sigvold the Magnificent of course. Statistically, he's not much better than the Chaos Lord, but he does have some nice extra traits. He's a duelist and has a charge defense against all, which are always handy. One of his biggest things though is that he can put on the auric armor, which gives him health regeneration, useful in many situations. He's great for getting after enemy lords and heroes because he's a duelist, but his damage isn't armor piercing, so do be aware of that. He also can't be put on mounts, so he has to be careful of getting assassinated by groups of characters, as he can't get away in a hurry because he has no horse, or dragon, or manticore. But of your 2 cheaper melee lord options, the Chaos Lord is going to be better in crowds, and Sigvold is going to be better in those one-on-one duels. Next to our Chaos Sorcerers, Shadow, Death, Metal, Fire, all the darkest, most evil of arts basically. As a character, they're all identical in the stats, of which dictate that they're not actually too bad in melee. They've got a lot of armor, they've got some melee defense, so they can hold their own in physical combat. Of course, different ones are going to be better against different factions, so the Fire is going to be useful against the Vampires or the Wood Elves, the Metal against the Dwarves, etc. So they're great if you don't want to spend the money on a Lord and a Hero. You can combine them with your Sorcerer Lord. Now if you've played this game at all, you'll know exactly who Kolek Sun Eater is, and you probably just trembled that I even mentioned his name. He is of course the master of all Shaggoths, and he is a brutal melee Lord indeed. High melee attack, monstrous weapon damage, a big charge bonus, all aid Kolek in putting out gargantuan amounts of destruction. He also has a bonus versus large, which makes him great fighting other large generals. He's also pretty fast, so he can catch up to some slower cavalries and lay absolute waste to them with his anti-large bonus. His hulking size also means that he has a lot of mass, so he's great for charging through enemy units and being able to push through a crowd with little to no problems. He also has a cheeky AoE spell, so he has many tricks up his sleeve. However, he is very expensive and is a massive target for missiles and artillery, so if you're not careful with him, he will be killed off very quickly. Lastly, the ever-chosen himself, Archaon. Having the Lord of the End Times in your command does not come cheap, but you do get a fantastic melee fighter for that price as well as a strong wizard. Tons of armor with a silver shield, great leadership, huge magical melee attack so no one's safe from Archaon, great melee damage potential, just an all-round beast of a melee general. But of course, he comes equipped with a bunch of spells, namely the Law of Fire. A bunch of useful spells for most factions, but of course excelling against factions that are weak to fire. You could of course drop some spells off to make him a little bit cheaper. As he is already very expensive and even more expensive if you want to put him on a mount, I'd advise you don't bring Archaon against factions who may heavily outnumber you. Because the Chaos are very expensive, you're going to need to save money wherever you can and try to bring more numbers. So where possible, choose or use your general wisely. For example, if I'm online and I'm facing the Wood Elves, I'm not going to bring Kolek because there's a lot of missiles that can blast Kolek down from the Elves, and also they have a lot of anti-large, lots of spears, so he's going to struggle to find anyone to attack against the Wood Elves. If I'm Kolek in the campaign and I'm against the Wood Elves, obviously I can't switch him out, so I'd probably just try and keep him out of the way, try to get those missiles dead first before I bring him in, and then use him like a shock cavalry, charge him in, take him away. But where possible, it'd be better to use some kind of Chaos Fire Lord or even Archaon, who'd be much better at dealing with the elves. And I know some of you will be saying, where the hell is Sartheria? Well, I haven't unlocked him yet. I pretty much know how he works, but I figure I can get the community involved on this one. I'd like you people to write up in the comments how Sartheria should be used and what he's generally good for. I'll pin the best one to the top so everyone can see it. And that brings us to the heroes, the Exalted Hero being the first of the bunch, and he is your one and only dedicated melee hero. And he is indeed one of the better melee heroes available compared to other factions. He's got slightly higher weapon strength, and his stats overall are almost reflecting that of a Lord. He is let down a little bit though by his leadership, which is probably less than average for the Chaos. He can also be put on various mounts to make him even stronger. So definitely a valuable option with many uses. Then you've got all your Chaos Sorcerers, who, like I said for the Lords, there's many different options and many different things that you can do with them, many different places and situations and against different factions that they will be useful. But that's kind of a whole guide in itself, I think, so I can't really talk about all the different uses of the spells, but definitely some great options to buff up your infantry or your monsters to make them even more formidable than they already are. And obviously some great offensive attacking spells, Fate of Yuna, Fireball, Spirit Leech, whatever. Lots of good potential options in the lores that they have available. Obviously, if you have a Lord with magic, you probably won't need them. The Exalted Hero could be useful as a bodyguard for heroes who may need one, like Sigvald, who's a bit more vulnerable because he can't have a mount. And the Exalted Hero could make a little bit of a play for air superiority as well. To the almighty Chaos Infantry then, beginning with Chaos Marauders. Now, when you look at the Chaos Marauder stats, they kind of don't look too bad for the price, right? You got a decent amount of melee attack, got some weapon strength, got a little bit of melee defense there as well, not too bad. But when you get to their average to low leadership, coupled with their terrible amount of armor, this is where they really fall down. They will take damage pretty quickly and thus rout very quickly, making them very, very unreliable. So I heavily recommend not using them as a frontline unit. They're a great meat shield, they're a great harassing unit, they can even flank a little bit. The same is true of Chaos Marauders with great weapons. They've got even less melee defense, but they are armor piercing in their attack, so they can be great for softening up the better units like your Black Orcs or your Greatswords. They're not going to beat them, but they could soften them up for the Chosen or Chaos Warriors. And that's probably the best role of Chaos Marauders, is as a kind of softening unit for the better units. Aspiring Champions, a cheap but very strong unit. They have the nifty little trait Encourage, which is great for helping keep your boys in the fight, as it buffs their leadership much like a Lord or Hero. But there is only 12 of them in the entire unit. Much like the Demigryphs, they have a smaller unit size because the individual units are so strong. Tons of armor, tons of leadership, tons of melee attack, which is magical as well. Great amount of melee defense, weapons strength, they've got it all, basically. They're not armor piercing though, so probably best to avoid the heavily armored units. They do have Vanguard deployment as well, randomly, but can always be useful potentially. Overall, I'd say they're best used mixed in with other units. A, because of the Encourage ability, and B, because there's only 12 of them, it makes them bigger targets if they're facing a single unit by themselves. It's 12 on 90 essentially, so they're going to get stabbed a lot and take more damage. Speaking of damage, a great damage dealing unit now in the Forsaken. They are a damage dealer with Frenzy, so they do get pretty crazy if you can get their leadership up. Their unit size is a little bit smaller than most though, but that doesn't affect them too much. And they are your best choice infantry if you're looking for someone to flank with. They are very fast on their feet with 48 speed, which means they can rush up on the enemy damn quick and also flank behind them damn quick. They're a unit that can do a lot of damage very quickly once they reach combat, but they do have quite low melee defense, so they are going to take a fair amount of damage. While they do have a ton of weapon strength, it is not armor piercing, so try to avoid those armored units. Personally, I tend to use them as a flanking unit, as they're great for getting after missile units because they can't really escape them because they're too damn fast, or you can even use them as a frontline unit against lightly armoured factions like the Beastmen or something, and they can potentially excel in that situation. As most of the Chaos Infantry is pretty slow, you can make some pretty nice speedy builds with Forsaken as your front line. But if you want a more traditional strong front line, then your Chaos Warriors are going to be the best bet. The units are starting to get pretty expensive now though, but really you're getting what you pay for. Chaos Warriors are a very strong unit, lots of armor, a silver shield, lots of leadership, lots of melee defense, they're great at holding the line, they've got lots of damage capability against unarmored foes, one of the best not so expensive infantries you're going to find. They are quite slow though, so are best served as a frontline unit rather than trying to flank. And then you have your Chaos Warriors with great weapons who are statistically very similar to the previous unit, but they have less melee defense as they don't have a shield, but do more damage because they're holding a massive frickin' axe. Of course, the great weapons are primarily there to get after the heavily armoured units and to deal with them, so a combination of both kinds of Chaos Warriors can be useful. Their unit size on both units is a little bit smaller than average, but that doesn't hold them back, they still just destroy most things. And then we have possibly the best anti-large unit overall in the game. Chaos Warriors with halberds are very effective at what they do. They have all the typical characteristics of most spearman units in the game: charge defense, anti-large, good melee defense, but with their high armor and high leadership it puts them a cut above the rest compared to other spear units. Of course though, they are pretty expensive. Much like the other Chaos Warriors, being super heavy makes them super slow. But as I said, Chaos Warriors with halberds are very effective at what they do. They can probably beat most large units in the game one-on-one. Can't say I've tested that, but from my experience, they usually get the job done. A must for pretty much any Chaos army, except when facing the dwarves, I suppose. And that leaves us with the mightiest of infantries in the old world, the Chosen. First up, you have the non-armor piercing Chosen. They've got tons of armor, a silver shield, great leadership, pretty much just great everything. I'm gonna save myself some time. They've got great everything. The high armor, high melee defense and high leadership mean they're very hard to get rid of. The only real danger to them, of course, is armor piercing units. And because of their expensive price tag, you'll do well to be careful with them. Don't think just because they're super tough that they're kind of invincible, because they are not. They will get taken down by armor piercing units just like anyone else. So get them fighting the lighter infantries and they will absolutely slay them. To the Chosen with halberds then, who are pretty much the same as the Chaos Warriors with halberds, just quite improved. And earlier I said that the Chaos Warriors with halberds are the best in the game, when the Chosen are right here. Why did I say that? Well, it's the price tag. 1400 is a hell of a lot to spend on a unit with only 60 men in it. Yes, they are very tough men and their stats are improved over the Chaos halberds, but for 1700 you could get 2 units of Chaos halberds, which may or may not be the better idea. If you've got one specific elite large unit coming your way like Durthu or some Minotaurs, sending in the Chosen halberds may be a better call than sending the Chaos halberds. And lastly, arguably the best infantry in the game, the Chosen with great weapons are a force to be reckoned with. They're going to play a similar role to the Chaos Warriors with great weapons, just improved in the stats of course, slightly smaller unit size again and an epic price tag. I'll wager there's no infantry unit that can beat them in a clean one-on-one. So if you're in the campaign and you can afford an army of Chosen, you will probably be damn near unstoppable. Online, a couple of units scattered into your main army can be really useful. Bringing a whole front line of them though, 4 or 5 units, could be a bit dangerous as you'll end up with quite a small army because you spent all your money on Chosen. Another big problem for Chosen is that because they're so slow and so expensive and so elite, they're very often the target for artillery and missiles. You'll have to do your best to protect them from this to avoid your precious Chosen being destroyed by a flying goblin. Overall though, as we know, Chaos Infantry is mightily strong. They have a good selection of low, middle and high tier options to help them deal with all kinds of enemy infantry and large. They're very much a quality over quantity type army. To Cavalry and Chariots. First of all, we have the Chaos Chariot. Very much your typical chariot unit, it's got a huge charge bonus, great armor, great leadership, great speed, so it'll serve you well being charged around non-stop and getting through the lighter infantries. Its damage is non-armor piercing, but it does have a bonus versus infantry, so lightly armored infantry are going to be a good target for this chariot. You are getting a damn good chariot for the price I think, so one to consider. If you're willing to spend a bit more though, you can get the Demon Gorilla Chariot, otherwise known as the Gorby's Chariot. It has many improved stats over the previous chariot, but is considerably slower. Its weapon damage is armor piercing though, and also has a bonus versus infantry. Couple that with its huge charge bonus and hulking mass, and it'll be able to go straight through most units. It also causes fear, and rightly so. It can be a great one to get after the heavily armoured expensive units, but it can pretty much destroy anything on its feet. Now onto their actual cavalry. Chaos Knights are a very strong cavalry indeed. They're a melee cavalry first of all, which means they have high melee defense so they can stay in combat for a while. They don't need to run away like shock cavalry does. They can stay there and throw down with whoever they're fighting. They are a very strong cavalry, great anti-infantry, great for fighting those lighter units because they're not armor piercing. And for that reason, it's probably best to not engage them with enemy tough cavalries because they're all heavily armoured, something that these boys can't deal with too well. So anti-infantry is really their role more than anything else. They also cause fear, so getting in rear charges on front lines can be a good way for them to go too. If you do want to get ultimate rear charges though, Chaos Knights with lances are going to be the way to go. They are a shock cavalry, so they're designed for charging the crap out of anything in the way. They've got massive charge bonus, less melee defense, so they're not meant to stay there like the melee cavalry are. Again, they're not armor piercing though, so be aware of that. And I think overall the Chaos Cavalry is very underrated. It's maybe overshadowed by the great monsters and great infantry, but honestly their cavalry is some of the best in the game. Not many factions have a melee cavalry first of all, let alone a damn good one like the Chaos Knights. And second of all, Chaos Knights with lances are statistically better than Blood Knights. It's mainly the bonus versus large for Blood Knights that makes them a little bit stronger. If you took that away, I'd wager the Chaos Knights may be able to defeat them one-on-one. Now to the few missile options that the Chaos have available. Marauder Horsemen are your typical skirmisher cavalry. They'll do a bit of damage to lighter units and can generally harass okay and get after skirmishers, but they are like most cheap missile cav, kinda useless half the time. 500 could definitely be better spent. But then there is a slightly more useful missile cavalry in the Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes. Their armor piercing missiles can rack up a fair amount of damage very quickly against heavily armoured targets. Great for reducing the effectiveness of your enemy's strongest units, especially slower heavy cavalries that will take the armor piercing damage but won't be able to catch them. So they can definitely have their uses. They don't have a great deal of ammo though, so when they do run out, probably best going after missiles or routing units. And lastly, you've got your Marauder Horse Masters. Basically an improved version of the first missile cav. They've got pretty good missile damage, so they can get some work done, and they can do a bit of light melee fighting as well. But at the cost of 750, you have to wonder if an extra unit of Chaos Warriors may be more useful. As these cavs are the only missile options that the Chaos have, it can be useful to maybe just bring one along. There's nothing more annoying than having flying units hovering around over you the whole time because there's nothing you can do about them because you have no missiles. Monsters and beasts, a big part of the Chaos game plan. Warhounds are the first of the bunch. You've got the two varieties, the poison and the normal. They're going to function like any other Warhound in the game, great for getting after missile units, great for chasing down skirmisher cavalries or anything fast. Of course the poison ones are going to help slow things down. I think they're nearly essential against most factions, as most factions have missile units, and these are a great way to counter them. And then another pretty common unit in the Trolls, Chaos Trolls and Armoured Chaos Trolls. Basically the same unit, just one obviously has armour. Great units for damaging those heavily armoured enemy units, whether it be an infantry or a cavalry, provided they don't have any anti-large bonus of course. They're also pretty quick on their feet, so they can be a great flanking unit, although their low leadership means they're not best fighting by themselves. They probably want to be mixed in with someone else to really get the most out of them. And that brings us to the one flying unit that the Chaos have available, the Chaos Feral Mentok. As flying units go, they're a pretty good one indeed. They've got pretty good stats all across the board with a lot of potential damage output. They also cause terror and, would you believe it, have no forest penalty. Probably because they fly straight over the trees. Obviously a great flanking or disrupting unit with the ability to come in for some nice rear charges on the enemy front lines. With a bit of a charge bonus and their terror involved in that, you can hopefully rout some units fairly quickly. As they are the only flying unit bar heroes and lords on other manticores or dragons, they have to be a little bit careful to not get outnumbered in the air. Chaos Spawn, a great anti-infantry monster. They are unbreakable, so they're not going anywhere, and mostly are just fantastic at destroying light infantry. Great weapon strength, albeit non-armor piercing, but their lack of melee defense and armor means they will take a fair amount of punishment. They're quite quick and have fear, so another great flanking unit potentially. A great unit for taking on hordes of light infantry of say the Beastmen or Greenskins, but they could really find a home against any faction. And no terrifying roster would be complete without a giant. The Chaos Giant is exactly the same as other giants, great against any kind of infantry provided it's not anti-large of course. Has a ton of armor piercing damage, so great against expensive heavy units or the dwarves, but does have to be careful of anti-large units and of course missiles. So giants can do well against the factions that don't have the tools to deal with them, that don't have a lot of anti-large, don't have a lot of missiles or great artillery for the job. But even if the factions do have those things, if you leave the giant out of the fight until the late game when all those things are dead, when all the spears are gone, when all the missiles are dead, the giant can be damn near unstoppable. Now into the Dragon Ogre units of the Chaos Army. Dragon Ogres themselves are a fantastic anti-large unit. They're almost like a cavalry. They've got good melee defense and a lot of damage output potential with 100 weapon strength, armor piercing and a bonus versus large. So great for taking down enemy monsters or heavily armored enemy cavalries. If the enemy cavalry does have an anti-large bonus though, you may want to be a bit more careful. A really great unit for securing your flank from cavalry or getting after any enemy monsters. Failing that, they can always flank round and beat the crap out of anything that's in the way. But no unit for the Chaos will beat crap quite like their most expensive monster. The Dragon Ogre Shaggoth is a force to be reckoned with. They're basically Colex mini-me, capable of a great deal of damage output, which is armor piercing. Couple that with them being very fast and causing terror, and you've got a devastating unit to anyone on the battlefield. Particularly useful for getting after elite cavalries, as most elite cavalries have 60 to 70 speed. The Shaggoth with its 78 speed will be able to catch them and smash them to absolute pieces. Because, perhaps a lesser known fact, it has a bonus versus large, like other Dragon Ogres. This can make it exceptional for taking on enemy lords on mounts as well. There's just a ton of potential uses for the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth. Has a charge bonus so you can use it like a shock cavalry, you can get after cavalry itself or just destroy infantry or lords, no problem. Much like Kolek though, it does have to be careful of missiles and artillery who will gun it down fairly quickly because it's so damn big. But this monster section of the Chaos is pretty freaking strong. As I've said, the best Chaos infantries are pretty slow, so they're not very good at flanking. Enter all these monsters, they are fantastic for that job. They're fast, and a lot of them have fear, which is going to help out as well, so there should definitely be room for monsters in most Chaos armies. And finally, the Chaos's one and only artillery. The Hell Cannon is a mighty piece of equipment indeed. has a decent amount of range and packs a hell of a punch. However, it is quite inaccurate, so it's kind of luck of the draw whether it's actually any use. However, you can counteract its terrible accuracy by firing it and controlling it yourself. The missile can be controlled in the air, so you can kind of make it land where you want it to. It also has a trait called Doomfire, which can reduce the enemy's leadership. So, while relatively expensive, it can be a devastating piece of kit to bring along. And that, my friends, concludes the Chaos roster. To a quick example battle then, I've got my Chaos army marching up, I've got Chaos Warriors on my front line. Someone's just cast a spell on them, bit of the old Flock of Doom. So Chaos Warrior front line, on my right flank I've got some Dragon Ogres, the fast anti-large ones, and some Halberds. On the other one I've got Chaos Knights and Halberds, so my flanks are well protected. Got some Chaos Spawn in the middle, some Chosen with great weapons, of course they'll just destroy everything. Got some Forsaken in there as well, and there's an Empire army approaching. Demigryphs coming in on my left, I'm going to poise my Halberds and Chaos Knights ready for them. Empire Knights coming on the right, got Dragon Ogres and Halberds to deal with them, so my flanks aren't really threatened too badly. My front line is just about ready to go. Got my main lord as a wizard, so he's casting some fire spells around. Going to start to approach the main Empire infantry front line, if you can even call it that. On my left side, Karl Franz is there on Deathclaw, kicking up a bit of havoc, but I've got some Halberds there to deal with him and those Demigryphs. Everything engaging now. Looks like there's some great swords coming in over here, so I'm going to get the Chosen with great weapons to come and deal with them. They are the best ones to sort them down. Empire Knights have done nothing, of course. Front lines are getting involved. A Chaos Spawn fighting swordsmen there. Very important they're not fighting spearmen, of course. Finally managed to sneak my Forsaken away. They did get a bit stuck on Karl Franz for a while. I wanted them to get round the back and get after the missile units. My Halberds over here, still holding on, fighting these Demigryphs. Some swordsmen coming over and some great swords, so they've got a lot to deal with. Going to need to get them some help. My Chaos Knights, though, coming around the back for a rear charge on these great swords and swordsmen. That should put an end to them fairly fast. We've won on the right side, so I'm going to start moving these units around the flank to get behind all the main line, as they have nothing left to protect from my flanking attack. My Chaos Knights also starting to charge around a bit now, get a little bit of hammer and anvil on the go. This will give them not only an attack in the rear penalty, but also the fear penalty from the Chaos Knights as well. So a double whammy there. My Forsaken still smashing these missile units' faces in. Karl Franz is on them though, so giving them a little bit of a hard time, but they're keeping them from the fight, so that's pretty important. Going to get these Chaos Spawn over here now though to help out these Halberds, who have been a little bit struggling with all the units coming after them, but because they're so damn strong, they are holding well enough. I'll be giving them some fiery magic buffs to help them with the Demigryphs and stuff, so that's probably helped keep them around as long as they have been. Dragon Ogres now flanking in on these boys, they've got no hope. Lots of wavering going on there. There's one unit of Chaos Warriors there fighting 3 enemy units, a testament to how strong the Chaos Warriors are and their holding abilities. Nice charge from the Demigryphs here though, into the back of my Chaos Warriors, but they're still hanging around. Chaos Warriors will not be so easily routed by a Demigryph charge. Looking okay on the left now with the Chaos Spawn's help. And it's really just this small pocket left in the centre for the Empire. The right's been broken, so all these units are going to help out now. In come the Chosen with great weapons. Halberdiers are in trouble. So the Chaos front line holding well, nothing got behind it. We managed to stop all their cavalry. Defended the flanks pretty well, got after the missile units. Well, these Demigryphs did get behind us, but it's kind of late in the battle when everything started to become a mess anyway, so it's kind of natural for holes to appear in front lines by this point, but it's too little too late for them. My Dragon Ogres are going to get into them now, and they are probably the strongest remaining threat, although it shouldn't be too long before we demolish them as well. The great swords are there, they're starting to waver. Everything on the right is pretty much gone. Nothing really here, a few units holding on, but not for too much longer. There's a unit of swordsmen coming back. They're now going to have some Chosen to deal with, as well as some Halberdiers coming at their face. Oh dear. Well, they're going to die. But there we go. That is pretty much the Chaos in action. I'm trying to employ all the things I've been talking about here. It's not always easy against the AI though, because they are quite unpredictable in what the hell they're going to do. But it's a typical battle setup really. Hold a strong front line, protect your flanks, try and win on the flanks so you can get behind the enemy and destroy them with rear charges. But this is just one way to play the Chaos. I could have brought a front line of Forsaken with a couple of Dragon Ogres, maybe a couple of Manticores, built a sort of terror, very fast terror army, maybe some Chaos Knights with Lances for a bit of hammer and anvil, so lots of different playstyles for the Chaos. I mean, there is lots of different playstyles for every faction really, but I think the Chaos are one of the better ones at doing it because they have not only a variety of different units, but strong units in those sections as well, so plenty to experiment with the Warriors of Chaos. And that, comrades, concludes this here Chaos guide. If you enjoy brutalizing your enemy with ruthless efficiency, then the Warriors of Chaos may be for you. Just remember that you've spent a lot on your units, so they need to be used wisely. You wouldn't buy a Horaaay and then go and enter it into a demolition derby after all. Use it correctly and it will serve you well. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future. Unless the end times come. then we're all screwed. Duh.